Hello everyone, welcome back to Exalted Mercury. So in this video I'm going to be talking about Saturn's retrograde transit. Saturn will be going retrograde in the humanitarian fixed air sign of Aquarius from the 17th of June till the 4th of November, which is around 4.5 months. So in astrology, when a planet in transit goes retrograde, it means there's a block in the normal flow of the energy, and instead the energy turns inwards, making it internalized and more subjective. The retrograde planet can bring back memories of the past, and a person may have to go back and deal with any unfinished business. The energy is slower in terms of manifesting the external world, so that is why it is not ideal to start something totally brand new, but rather going back and correcting anything in the past. So what happens during Saturn retrograde? When Saturn goes retrograde in transit, it means that the energy is inwardly focused, which means that this can be a very reflective period where a person can have feelings of guilt, self-doubt, fear, and even have feelings of resentment. Retrograde Saturn in transit is a time to learn from mistakes, and you can get another chance to walk on the right path and get the desired result from your hard work. So first and foremost, Saturn is the planet of karma. So during this period, it is a good time to reflect on your past actions. Have you done anything that you regret and is giving you a guilty conscience? This period, you can be forced to pay back some karmic debt. Either voluntarily, you can reflect back on your past actions and correct it during this period, or an event can happen which forces you to revisit your actions. So karma consists of rewards and riches, and not only difficulties and punishments. So if you have done any good actions in the past, Saturn retrograde can give you a reward or a positive outcome in the area of your life which Saturn is transiting or ruling. Saturn represents responsibilities. Responsibility isn't just limited to work. It includes being responsible, for example, by taking care of our health, being a responsible parent to our kids, or even social responsibilities like helping people in need, or environmental responsibilities by practicing recycling and throwing rubbish into the right bin. So two things can happen here. If you haven't followed your responsibilities in relation to the house Saturn is ruling or transiting, then you will be asked to go back to the beginning and start to be responsible. If you have followed your responsibilities in relation to the house Saturn is ruling or transiting, then this period can be a time where you can feel a little overwhelmed by the responsibilities. So it's a time to reduce them and make them more manageable. Saturn rules the sign of Capricorn. So whatever house Capricorn is ruling in your chart, during this retrograde period, you will have to revisit that area of your life as well. So if you are Sagittarius, Capricorn and Aquarius moon sign, you may be reminded of events which happened during your previous phase of Sarasati, which can make you feel frustrated. But you have to remember that this is just a temporary block of energy, and the positive side is it is giving you an opportunity to go back and get some kind of reward by dealing with something related to that house. While retrograde Saturn is stronger and it sounds better, it however means that you have to double the effort, doubling the work, which can lead to frustrations. Especially if you are someone who is Mars dominated, where you like to move and progress quickly. If you are someone who is Saturn dominated, or if you have retrograde planets in your birth chart, then this retrograde transit can be a little bit easier to deal with. Nonetheless, regardless of natal chart combinations, nobody really enjoys doing things twice or having to do things over again. But sometimes it is necessary for our growth and development. And in the end, Saturn will always give you a positive result in terms of making you mentally stronger and building a solid base and foundation. This Saturn retrograde will be happening in the sign of Aquarius. So in addition to the previous things that I mentioned, this Saturn retrograde can center around your social circles, your goals, desires, and your visions for the future. Whilst Saturn is retrograde, there will also be a mutual aspect between Mars and Saturn up until the 18th of August. Mars will be forcing its impatience on Saturn, which can mean Saturn can be forced to take action before it's even ready. So when Saturn is retrograde and reflecting on what it wants to correct, Mars will pressure Saturn to act quickly before it's even ready and systematically thought it through. That can make this retrograde period a little bit stressful for some people up until the 18th of August. So you have to remember to show a little bit of patience. However, there could be something that requires urgent attention, so you have to be mindful of that. Saturn will be retrograde in Shatabisha Nakshatra up until October 2023, which is the nakshatra of alternative healing, healthcare, and technology. Saturn here likes to serve people through technology, IT, and software, and anything related to new age technology. So during this retrograde period, those that are working in these areas can notice either a breakthrough or a disclosure of meaningful things, such as new healing methods or new technology. So for example, the last time Saturn was retrograde in Shatabisha Nakshatra was between June and November 1994. And that's when the BRCA1 gene was first cloned, which was a discovery that accelerated cancer research. In technology, the first ever smartphone, IBM Simon, went on sale during August 1994, during the Saturn retrograde period in Shatabisha. So this transit is beneficial for those working in healthcare and technology. So now I'll go through Saturn retrograde for each of the zodiac signs. For Aries natives, Saturn will be retrograde in your 11th house, which is the house of social groups and friendship circles. So when Saturn transits this house, it automatically slows it down. But when it goes retrograde, it means it's a time to be really objective and decide whether you actually fit into a particular group, or do you need to outcast yourself from it. 11th house is your friendship circle, but it is also any groups you belong to, such as a cricket or netball team, a music band, or a yoga club. So during this transit, you can also reflect upon your actions and think about the way you have treated friends and people in your network, and also how they have treated you. If you have had any falling out with friends, or you feel guilty about something, during this retrograde, it is possible to repair the relationship. But because Saturn is retrograde for 5 months, it may not be as simple as picking up the phone and becoming friends again. There will be a lot of work and effort required because Saturn represents fear, so you may feel apprehensive to reconnect with the person. The 11th house also represents your long-term goals, and when Saturn is direct, you can be slowly working towards them. However, when Saturn is retrograde, it can mean that either you can have feelings of doubts on whether you can actually achieve them, or for reasons out of your hands, you have had to stop the progress of your goals. If you are having feelings of self-doubt, instead of thinking negatively, what you should do is go over the steps required to achieve your goal. So for example, if your goal is academic and you are having doubts on getting a good degree, then this is a time to really go over the previous modules you have learned and completed and really strengthen your understanding. If your goal is financial, because the 11th house does represent income, then now is a good time to go to do research on investments and financial planning. During a retrograde transit, it is a good time to absorb as much knowledge as you can. And then when it goes direct, you can turn the input into output. Saturn does represent economic responsibility, which includes things like budgeting. So this is a good time to do planning. If you're someone who is already very structured and systematic, then during this Saturn retrograde, you can lose some focus or go off track in pursuit of your goals. If you do feel less focused during this transit, it's perfectly okay to take a break, or you could engage in mindfulness and meditation to help you stay concentrated. If there are no self-imposed mental blocks, then there could be external factors which can slow your earnings down during this period, such as business being slow, or maybe you're coming to an end of an employment contract. So since Saturn also rules the 10th house and it's retrograde in the 11th house, it can mean that you might feel like you're not earning enough money. So during this retrograde period, you can feel like changing jobs. So for Aries natives, this is a good time to change jobs because Saturn is your 10th house lord. And it means that you need to go back and change something so that you can progress better when Saturn is direct. Mars will also be aspecting Saturn and the 11th house, which can give you a push to make that change. So if you don't have a job, then now is the time to really reflect on what you are doing wrong. So you need to review your past job applications, your resume, and make the necessary corrections, and you'll be able to get a job. In terms of health, if you are following transits from the moon, Jupiter and Rahu have probably made you mentally exhausted, and now this retrograde period can add to that. So in order to get some relief, it's important to take a step back and just chill out, take a day off, or perhaps do some relaxation activities to take that weight off your shoulders. This is a good time to streamline all your 11th house activities or anything that is going on in your life. For Taurus natives, Saturn will be retrograde in your 10th house, which is a house of karma. So Saturn is the natural ruler of the 10th house because it is the lord of the sign of Capricorn. So I mentioned at the beginning of the video, Saturn is the lord of karma. So retrograde Saturn is a time to rethink your karma, which are your actions, and make changes. So in particular related to your profession. The 10th house is the strongest Kendra house. So this retrograde period means that you have to work twice as hard, but the results can be twice as good, depending on your natal chart. So Saturn retrograde in Aquarius in the 10th house means that the focus is around your career goals. So first of all, if you are a fresh graduate, you may feel insecure or unsure of yourself in trying to find the right path. So rather than just picking up any job during this period, this is a good time to think and make a list of what appeals to you and find jobs which match some of your interests. If you don't use this time adequately, then what can happen is you can be prone to changing jobs multiple times. And then at the end of the retrograde period, you might not have gotten anywhere. If you are someone who is struggling to find a job, then this is a time to revamp your resume and develop your application and interview skills. So something is missing in your approach. So you need to do something better so you can do it during this retrograde period. If you already have a job but are struggling to cope with the demands, then during this retrograde period, you can lose some focus and struggle with the responsibilities. So this is now the time to streamline your work or reduce your responsibilities because perhaps you may have taken on too much. Now, because Saturn also rules the 9th house, it means that you may have to go back and have those conversations with your seniors and bosses so that the work can become more manageable. If you have a job and the working conditions are fine, but you feel like you're not getting anywhere, then as I mentioned, Saturn is ruling the 9th house. So this is a perfect time to use the 9th house qualities, such as enrolling in a higher education or professional courses, so that you can upgrade your skills and find better opportunities. Remember, the Karaka of the 9th house, Jupiter, is in the 12th house, which represents good expenses and educational expenses. So now is the perfect time to engage in some learning. During this retrograde period, some of you may also feel doubts. Some of you may have doubts in your ability to perform a role, or perhaps because of other issues, you may not be able to progress much in your career during this retrograde period. Saturn and Jupiter and Rahu are in your 12th house, so some of you may be going through periods of healing, where the focus is on your health rather than career. If you are suffering from any health issues, Saturn retrograde in the 10th house is a time to evaluate your progress in terms of healing. So certain medications can be stopped or doses can be changed. In terms of business, if you are self-employed, that's fine. But if you are in a business partnership, then during this retrograde period, you can have doubts and fears on the future of the business. So this is similar for those that are in like a personal relationship. And if your natal chart is weak or malefic in terms of relationship, then some of you can experience a lack of happiness. If your chart is strong, then obviously you don't have anything to worry about. For Gemini natives, Saturn will be going retrograde in the 9th house, which governs your personal philosophies and beliefs, and experiences gained through travel and cultural exploration. So when Saturn is retrograde in the 9th house, the focus is around your religious desires and higher education goals, because the 9th house is being ruled by Aquarius. So 9th house is known as Dharma Stan, and it represents our essential dharma, to perform our duties and responsibilities. So responsibility is governed by the planet Saturn. As humans, we all have responsibilities. First and foremost, it is to follow the law. And then there are additional responsibilities depending on if we are a father, a mother, a husband, a wife, and so on. So Saturn is a strict and faithful planet. And when it transits retrograde in the 9th house, it can be a time to review on how we have performed our responsibilities in our life so far. We all have regrets, and during this period we could be thinking about what we could have done better. And depending on our circumstances, this period may give us a chance to potentially make changes so that we can perform our responsibilities better. If you are someone who has a lot of responsibilities in their life, then this retrograde period can be a time where you feel overwhelmed. So it is a time to simplify or reduce your current responsibilities, if possible, to make them more manageable. So for example, in terms of work, some of you may be having problems with your work or job, in particular with your bosses, since the start of the year. So this is a time to do something about it, where you can either have a conversation with your bosses or you can change your job. Saturn expects us to work, but it is a very fair planet. So during its retrograde transit, it is a time to make any changes. For those that are studying, when Saturn goes retrograde in the 9th house, it means the path for your studies can be interrupted, and you might be having doubts about what you are studying. During this retrograde period, it is possible to change schools or change courses. Jupiter, which is the natural significator of higher learning, will also be going retrograde in September. So between September, October and November, some of you may have to either resit exams or there will be some change in your learning. Or it could be a period where you can actually think about starting to study something if you are not studying anything at the moment. The ninth house represents our belief system, and Saturn normally holds old-fashioned traditional beliefs. So when it transits Aquarius, you can feel a push to make your beliefs more progressive, either from younger members of the family, friends, or society in general. If you are someone who is very traditional, then this can be a little bit of a difficult time, especially when it goes retrograde, because you are trying to resist from following the Aquarius energy, which can bring some challenges in the mind. So this is a time to restructure your belief system. We can't live our life the same way as people did 100 years ago, or even 30 years ago. The world and beliefs evolve, and we have to evolve with them, which is what Aquarius is all about. Saturn also rules the 8th house, which means that there are 8th house things which you may need to attend to during this period, which can have an effect on your belief system. Since 8th house rules transformation, which Saturn doesn't really like, but in Capricorn, which rules your 8th house, the transformation is more structured, making it a little bit easier to handle. In terms of health, Saturn retrograde in the 9th house can create some kind of stress or anxiety in relation to your 6th house, which includes your health and also work. So this is a good time to make some changes to your daily routine, which can promote better health. For Cancer natives. So Saturn will be going retrograde in your 8th house of transformation and sudden events. So the 8th house is a very intense house where emotions can intensify and you don't feel like yourself. So the 8th house is associated with fear, grief, despair, and when Saturn, the planet of fear, goes retrograde, it can mean that the energy is internalized, giving a strong degree of fear depending on your natal chart. But because your 8th house is ruled by Aquarius, any transformation you experience can be in a slightly more supportive environment. You see, when Saturn is retrograde, it is more powerful, but it is not always easy to deal with in the Moksha Trikona houses. But no doubt you will be able to come out a stronger person at the end of this transit. So for Cancer natives, the home is where the heart is. And because Cancer is the natural 4th house of the zodiac, some of you could be starting to sense instability in your home environment, either with your family or anything related to property. Ketu is also in your 4th house. And when Saturn goes retrograde, it can bring some internal fear in relation to these matters. So you can feel a little bit lost and stressed because you're not able to define any structure or boundaries yet. There could be transformation in regards to health. So perhaps you have been on a waiting list for a while to have surgery or a procedure done. So during this retrograde period, you can be called up to have the treatment, which can make a person feel nervous as it gets closer. Or perhaps you may have been diagnosed with something. So during this retrograde period, you may have to wait before you can have the treatment. So either of these two things can happen. There could be transformations that can take place in the area of joint finances. Economic safety and financial stability is very important to Cancer natives. So Saturn retrograde can bring some challenges in these matters. For example, if you are not someone who manages money in your household, then this is a period you may need to start taking responsibility. Or there could be changes in your relationship or marriage or your work which has an effect on your joint financial matters. 8th house also represents taxes. So here you may have to go back and amend or adjust any tax returns you have submitted in recent times. 8th house is also insurance. So you can review your existing policies and perhaps make updates to any schedules. In terms of career, if your natal chart has malefic influences for career, Guru Chandal Yog in the 10th house may have disturbed your professional life. So now this Saturn retrograde in the 8th house is a time to go back and revive or restart your career. So if you are not working during this period, you can get a job. Since Saturn also rules your 7th house, and if you are in a relationship or marriage, it means that you need to go back and attend to some issues related to the 7th house. So during this period, you can start to mentally feel changes in your relationship with your other half. Perhaps things are no longer working. So this is also something that could be on your mind during this period. Saturn in Shatabisha Nakshatra, which is a nakshatra of secrets. So here you can discover some secrets about your spouse. This can also be a time where you go back to the 7th house and perhaps maybe get married, which can be a life-changing transformation as well. For Leo natives, Saturn will be going retrograde in your 7th house, which is a house of partnerships and relationships. So when Aquarius rules the 7th house, it means that you can have some goals and desires around your relationship. So when Saturn is influencing the 7th house, it means that the time has come to focus and take responsibility in your personal life or with partnerships, especially if you are under the age of 40. So if you are having any problems in your marriage or relationship, Saturn retrograde in the 7th house is asking you to work harder to find balance and fairness in your relationship. Since Jupiter is ruling your 5th house and 8th house and has formed the Guru Chandal Yog, it may have disturbed your relationship. So Saturn retrograde is a time to revive your relationship. Maybe it's time to start again from the beginning. This could also be a period where there is some pending karma between you and your spouse. Something either of you need to do, or perhaps a conversation you need to have, or maybe simply just spending more time together. If you are single, then there is a possibility to reconnect with someone you met in the past, especially if you have retrograde planets in the 7th house in your birth chart. So remember, retrograde means that the energy is turned inwards. So you could be thinking about people you met in the past who at the time didn't meet your requirements, but now you could have a change of heart. Venus will also be going retrograde. So if you are looking to meet someone completely new, then this period things can be a little bit slow. The period is asking you to rethink what you want from a relationship. In terms of work, Saturn is also the 6th house lord. And when it is retrograde, it means that you may have to attend to 6th house issues. So for example, Guru Chandal Yog in the 9th house can mean you may have had a new manager or boss in your workplace. So Saturn retrograde can show you are hesitant in your job because the conditions may have changed. Saturn retrograde in the 7th can mean that some of you will feel like you're not making any progress in your career, or your career can slow down due to issues in other areas of your life. So this is a good time to think about upgrading your skills to create career opportunities, because Jupiter is in the 9th house of higher learning and slowly emerging out of the smoke of Rahu. For health, when 6th house lord Saturn goes retrograde, it can mean that you're being asked to attend to some 6th house issues. So anything to do with your stomach, kidney or digestion can pop up. Saturn retrograde in the 7th house can also give mental stress, since it is aspecting the Lagna and is 4th from the 4th, while Ketu in the 3rd can take the energy away from you, which can make you feel tired. So this is a time to look after your mental health as well. So it's a good idea to take some time out from work and just recuperate. For Virgo natives, Saturn will be going retrograde in your 6th house, which is the house of livelihood. So first of all, when Saturn goes retrograde in the 6th house, two things can happen in relation to work. It can make you less motivated and slow down your work. When Saturn influences the 7th and 10th house, it slows down career progress. But in the 6th house, which is a house of service, during its retrograde motion, the tasks or jobs which come in during this period can be a struggle or take a very long time to finish. Or this can be a less busy period for you. What can also happen is old jobs and tasks which you thought were complete can reappear where there is further work required. Saturn retrograde in the 6th house can also show returning to your old workplace. 6th house is naturally an analytical house because it is the natural house of Virgo. So Saturn retrograde in the 6th house can give a tendency to overanalyze things, which means it takes even longer to complete tasks, perform responsibilities, and make decisions. The 6th house is the house of routine. So if you are a structured and disciplined person, Saturn retrograde can create situations which bring instability to your schedule. So you have to put more effort and work harder during this retrograde period in order to keep up with your schedule. The 6th house is ruled by Aquarius. So during this period, you can reassess your commitments to the groups that you belong to. In terms of personal life, 7th Lord Jupiter isn't in an ideal position. And because it is forming a Guru Chandal Yoga, if in your birth chart the 7th house is afflicted, you may have started to experience some instability in your relationships. Saturn is your 5th house lord, so this can be a time to revive your relationship if you have suffered any problems. If you have newly born children or children under the age of 15, then during this period you might look at new ways of raising or parenting. Because the 5th lord is in the 6th house, it can mean that kids are already taking up a large part of your time. So when Saturn goes retrograde in the 6th house, it's asking you what you can do differently, how you can serve your kids better. If you are expecting to have a child during this period, you may feel an increased amount of worry and anxiety and doubts in terms of financially raising a child, or perhaps if you are having any issues with your spouse, you might be thinking about the effect of this on your child. For students and those that are in higher education, 5th Lord Saturn is retrograde in the 6th house, which means that knowledge can be blocked. So that doesn't mean that you can't do well in your studies. It just means that this is a time to recap topics and modules you've learned before and refresh your knowledge and strengthen your understanding. Saturn retrograde in the 6th house can fill a person with some anxiety and worry with regards to their health. So if you are suffering from any ailments, your well-being can be at the forefront of your mind during this period. Saturn in the 6th house is good because it restricts diseases, but the other major planets such as Jupiter and Rahu in the 8th can give surgeries, so you may be required to take care of yourself a bit more while Saturn is retrograde. For Libra natives, Saturn will be going retrograde in your 5th house, which is a natural house for Leo and the Sun. So Saturn generally doesn't feel that comfortable here. However, it is in its Mool Trikona sign, and being a Yogarak planet, it will give some good results with time and patience. So first of all, Saturn in the 5th house can destroy false ego. So during this retrograde period, it can make a person realize that the idea and concept they have created about themselves may not be true. So if you have any unrealistic high opinion of yourself, then you can be brought back down to earth through any situation or event, and during this retrograde period, you will be required to rework your ego. Now, if you're someone who is naturally a pessimistic person, then the opposite can happen. Saturn is in its small Trikona sign, so during this retrograde, you can build up some confidence and pride which was lacking previously. It will feel like going back and gaining that confidence which was missing, so that you can progress when Saturn goes direct. In terms of work, Jupiter forming a Guru Jandal Yoga may have disturbed your career, depending on your natal chart. So Saturn retrograde can actually help you restart your career and get back to the stage where you were previously. When Saturn transits the 5th house, people also experience a loss of service. So some of you would have experienced changes in your work. So this is a period to get back to where you were. This can also be a time where you feel apprehensive about any changes in your workplace. Jupiter is slowly emerging out of the smoke of Rahu and aspecting your 11th, 1st and 3rd house, which should give you a boost of energy and optimism to your personality, which should help you deal with any career issues. Since Aquarius rules the 5th house, some of you may have goals and desires in relation to creativity and really enjoy new ways of having fun. So when Saturn is retrograde, it is a good time to expand your knowledge of creative areas. So for example, if you are a content creator, it is a good idea to reflect upon the content you have created and how you can make it better. This is a good time to restart any hobbies such as playing a musical instrument, sports or any activities. In terms of health, Jupiter is forming a Guru Jandal Yoga, which may have disturbed your health depending on your natal chart. So Saturn retrograde is a time where you have to go back and make some changes in your life to support your well-being. This might be reducing working hours or taking some time off work, or making permanent changes to your diet and daily schedule. Rahu will transit into your 6th house in October, which means that you can come across treatment options to aid your recovery. Saturn is also ruling the 4th house, and when it transits the 5th house, it means that there are 4th house matters which you may need to attend to. So this could be in relation to property, where it is possible to move house during this period. 4th house is also nourishment and emotions. So here you can reflect back at times in your life which had a big emotional impact on you. Things in the past that have made you sad. However, by the end of this retrograde period, you will be able to make peace with it and move on. The 5th house is the house of children. So during this retrograde period, if a child is due, you can experience some anxiety and stress with this new beginning in your life. If you already have children that are young or of adult age, they can be more on your mind during this period for whatever reason. Maybe they are moving away, or they might have some health issues. For Scorpio natives, Saturn will be going retrograde in the 4th house, which is connected to emotions, and these are feelings such as sadness, happiness and depression that we feel intensely inside of us. So Saturn transiting the 4th house is a time where you can work hard to reclaim emotional soul sovereignty and set clear boundaries. So when a retrograde planet like Saturn transits the 4th house, the energy is directed inwards. so it can create increased feelings of anxiety and agitation in relation to fourth house matters like property, mother, family, and it can also be an emotional time where you look back at how you were raised as a person and thinking about the nurturing and conditioning you received, or reflecting on how you are raising your children and family. Perhaps you might have some regrets, so this can be an emotional time. So first of all, in terms of emotions, Saturn retrograde in Aquarius in the fourth house means that it can be a struggle to gain emotional independence. So what I mean by that is, for example, you will feel like you need to seek reassurance or validation of every decision, which can bring unhappiness and dissatisfaction. You want to feel your own emotions, and you don't want them to be dictated by others. So during this retrograde period, you can set up boundaries around the people in your life, giving you their opinions. Or perhaps you have already set up boundaries. So this can be a period where people in your life may not respect your boundaries. So this period can give a lack of mental peace. Saturn transiting the fourth house can also be a challenging time with whoever you are living with. If you are living with your in-laws, it can be hard, or house sharing can also be a difficult time because it could be a strict environment with too many rules. So in this retrograde period, it is a time where you can feel overwhelmed by the rules or your responsibilities in the home environment for whatever reason. So this can be a period where you may look for a new place to live. Saturn retrograde in the fourth house can show changes in residence. So for example, you might have to sell a place in order to buy a new place, which can cause an increase of anxiety while a person waits for things to go through. Saturn retrograde in the fourth house can also show renovating a home, decluttering a home, or any domestic issues, because Saturn is the planet of working. So it means that you may be forced to do some work in the house. And during this Saturn retrograde period, it can take a bit longer than expected, which can create a little bit more stress. Since Saturn is also ruling the third house, when it transits the fourth house, it can mean that you might have to revisit things that support the third house. The third house rules the conscious mind and intellect. So if you are a student, then this can mean that you have to reread some topics or resit exams, which can cause a little bit of frustration. Third house is also the house of decision making. So during this period, you may change your decisions on matters to do with property, higher education, and family. In terms of work, Jupiter and Rahu are in your sixth house, forming a Guru Jandal Yog. So either you can be very busy at your work, or you might have experienced changes. However, Saturn retrograde in the fourth house can mean it is possible to change your job during this period. For Sagittarius natives, Saturn will be going retrograde in your third house, which is the house of self-efforts. Now Saturn is good in the third house, but when it is retrograde, it means that there will be more mental and physical effort required from you. So for example, the third house is the natural house for Mercury, which is a friend of Saturn, and it represents intellect. Saturn retrograde is a period to reflect on how you are processing information in your mind. So for example, if you are a student, you may have to reprocess certain information, which means that you may have to reread certain resources to help you with your learning. Learning can also be a bit slow during this period with more mental effort required. When Aquarius rules the third house, it means that your mind can be filled with brilliant ideas. But during this Saturn retrograde period, it can be harder to produce anything out of them. Third house also rules decision making. So when Saturn goes retrograde in the third house, you will start to reflect on some of your decisions you have made in recent times or the past. You will be reprocessing all the information again, and during this retrograde period, you can change your decisions on certain matters. Saturn is also ruling your second house. So any past decisions you made on your family, money, or even things that you have said in the past, and even your relationships, because the second house is the longevity of relationships. So perhaps you will be reflecting on these things and maybe changing your mind. The third house also represents communication. So people don't really take too much notice in how they're communicating because it just happens naturally. So when Saturn is retrograde, you'll be more conscious on how you communicate. So there will be more effort required to communicate. So for example, in terms of work, this can mean re-clarifying tasks or jobs, or even miscommunication is possible. So this period can be similar to Mercury retrograde. So it's better to give yourself extra time during this period if you are writing emails or making speeches or sitting interviews. When there is a retrograde planet in the third house, communication doesn't flow as normal. And because it is Saturn that is retrograde, it can be communication in the workplace, with siblings, or even with your network circle, because it is happening in the sign of Aquarius. Saturn is also ruling your second house. So when it is retrograde in the third house, there could be things related to the second house that could pop up again, especially if you have retrograde planets in your second house in your natal chart. So the second house represents money. So this could be a time you use your self-efforts to rethink how you are managing your money. Ketu is in the 11th house and Jupiter is aspecting the 11th house too. So you could be itching to change jobs so that you can earn more money. In terms of dating and relationships, Saturn in the third is 11th from the 5th. So if you have been dating someone, then you will be reassessing what you want out of that relationship and whether you will be able to fulfill your partnership goals with that person. Jupiter is in the 5th house with Rahu. So you want to have fun and feel optimistic. But the aspect of Saturn on the 5th house is also calming the Jupiterian energy, which will make you feel a bit grounded. For Capricorn natives. So Saturn will be going retrograde in your second house, which is the house of money, assets and family. So when Saturn is influencing the second house, generally you will always get a positive result at the end of the 2.5 year transit, especially in terms of money, because it is the natural house of Venus, which is a friend of Saturn. So Aquarius ruling the second house also means that you have goals and desires around your finances. So actually, when Aquarius is ruling the second house, it means that the person can be a risk taker, which may not always pay off. So Saturn's transit in the second house wants you to be more responsible with your money, and when it goes retrograde, a couple of things can happen. So first of all, if you are spendthrift and you haven't taken responsibility, Saturn will want you to go back to the beginning and start being more responsible. So the way Saturn does that is by bringing some structure and discipline in organizing your money and assets. So sometimes it can make you do that through an unfortunate event. Like for example, if you have lost money through any situation, it means that a person won't take as many risks and will become better organized. Now, if you are naturally a cautious person and responsible with money, which many Capricorns would be, then during this retrograde period, you can lose a little bit of discipline and you may be irresponsible with money, and you might spend money on things that you wouldn't usually do if Saturn was direct. So you see, when a planet is retrograde, the energy is directed inwards, which can sometimes give us a headache. So a person can release that tension by letting go and making a purchase, which is fine, but you need to be careful with any big purchases. In terms of relationships and marriage, K2 is currently in your 10th house. So the last few years you may have felt a lack of happiness in your marriage or partnership, or perhaps with your in-laws. So when Saturn is retrograde in the 2nd house, which is the house of longevity of marriage, you'll be rethinking long and hard about your future together. Now, if you don't have any issues in your marriage, then that's good. But if you have had any issues in the past, Saturn retrograde can make you go through transformations in your marriage or business partnership. Rahu is also in your 4th house, forming a Guru Jandal Yog. And Jupiter is a malefic planet for you guys, so it can disturb your home environment. If your natal chart is weak in terms of career, then this retrograde Saturn can also show changes in your work, because K2 is also in the 10th house, and together they are in a trine in Eartha Trikona houses. So changes in job and also changes in income is possible during this period depending on your natal chart. Since Saturn is ruling the 1st house, and when it is retrograde in the 2nd house, you can be thinking long and hard about what you want in life. Perhaps a part of you is itching for a change or a new beginning. So during this period, it is possible to experience a new beginning, such as changing house or moving abroad. 1st house Lord Saturn retrograde in transit can also show you may have to go back and attend to any health issues. So if you suffered from any health issues in the past 2 or 3 years, you could be required to go back and have a checkup. So it's important to take care of your health too. At the moment in transit, your 4th house is very heavy with Jupiter and Rahu. So if you do have any problems related to chest, heart, lungs, and in your natal chart your 4th house is afflicted, then you have to take care during this period. Saturn retrograde in the 2nd house means that you need to be careful of what you eat as well, because Aquarius is not only a financial risk taker, but also a risk taker in what they consume. So you have to take care while Saturn is retrograde. For students and those in higher education, it can be a little bit of a difficult period to focus, because you might feel a lack of support at times. So Saturn retrograde in the 2nd house can show a period where it can be difficult to follow your usual routine in relation to higher education. So you might miss classes or forget assignments. So it's important to perhaps create a new schedule which you can follow during this retrograde period. Because Saturn is the lord of your chart, being the ruler of Capricorn, it means that this retrograde motion can have a bigger impact on you. So it's a time not to take any undue risks. And if you do feel overwhelmed by this energy, then engaging in mindfulness, meditation, and exercise is a good way to let off steam. For Aquarius natives, Saturn will be going retrograde in your 1st house, which is a house of self, the house of identity, and the house of new beginnings. So if you follow the transits from the moon, then you will be going through the peak phase of Sarasati, which means that Saturn is going over your natal moon. So first of all, if you have started any new project or anything new in your life recently or the past 6 months, then during this retrograde period, you might have to restart it, or there could be a pause in what you are trying to do. So for example, you might have moved house in the last 6 months, but during this retrograde period, you may decide that the place you moved to isn't quite right. So during this retrograde period, you can restart and move to a place which suits you more. Or this retrograde period may not let you move house due to other circumstances that are present. Another example is if you have started a new project such as renovating your house. Then during this retrograde period, you may not be able to progress with it for whatever reasons, or you may have to redo certain renovations. So these interruptions or reboots are caused by the retrograde energy, which gets directed inwards and can result in an increase of stress in your mind, and sometimes make you redo work, which means extra effort and energy. So it doesn't have to be related to the house. I'm giving the example of home because moon represents shelter, and since Saturn is going over the natal moon, but it could be anything new, such as a new job, higher education, or even a relationship. So when people say a retrograde energy is more powerful, with respect to Saturn, it means you end up working harder, which on one hand can be frustrating, but on the other hand, the result is always better the second time round, or better with more time and effort. In terms of health, because Saturn is ruling the 12th house, and when it transits the first house, you may have to attend to 12th house issues. So if you have suffered any health issues in the past 2-3 years, then during this retrograde period, you may have to have a follow-up medical appointment, and there could be a review of your current medication, or there could be new drugs and medicine which can help you with your healing, because Shata Bisha Nakshatra is to do with healing, and the 12th house is healing as well. During this period, you can also reflect and relive some of the experiences that you've had in your life so far. So for example, the 12th house is the house of letting go. So this transit can be a deep time in the company of your own thoughts, where you explore the past experiences you've had. Maybe you might think about the people who you have lost in your life, or the places you visited or lived. When a retrograde planet is in the first house, it can create an introverted personality where you prefer to be on your own, which isn't a bad thing, because being able to reflect on your life is a good way to learn from mistakes. But because you are going through the peak phase of Sarasati, you have to make sure not to completely isolate yourself. Since Saturn is transiting over your natal moon, which represents the subconscious mind, and since Saturn's energy of fear is directed inwards, it can be quite an intense period on the mind, which can cause headaches or migraines. So you have to try and relax a bit more, perhaps do exercise or meditation to help calm your mind. If you are someone who is naturally laid back with an introspective personality, then this retrograde transit may not affect you as much as someone who is a go-getter and cannot sit idle. If in the past you have been living abroad or you went abroad, then this Saturn retrograde in the first house can take a person back overseas to complete any unfinished or pending work. So this could be related to Korea, where you can be requested to go work abroad, or it can be something to do with your personal life where you have to go back and complete something. If you are a student, you have to go with this retrograde energy rather than against it. This is a good opportunity to refresh your knowledge on certain topics, or you can go back over the prerequisites and really master what you learnt before. If your natal chart has malefic energy related to higher education, then this Saturn retrograde can make you suspend your studies, especially since Ketu is also in the 9th house. For Pisces natives, Saturn will be going retrograde in your 12th house, which is a house of letting go, hidden things, and confined places. It also rules endings, where something makes way for something new. The 12th house is an endless ocean of memories, experiences, and is the accumulation of all the previous 11 houses. It contains everything and nothing at the same time. It is the house where the personality dissolves into something greater. The 12th house represents the inner you and is already a place of deep introspection and self-reflection. So when a retrograde planet like Saturn transits this house, in some ways it feels quite comfortable because it gives you the power to deeply reflect on your life and let go of the things in your life that are of no purpose to you anymore. Since the 12th house is a Dustana house and represents losses and letting go, Saturn retrograde here can help pause losses temporarily. So for example, in terms of spending money, because Saturn is in its Mul Trikona sign, some of you would have been spending money on your desires, whatever they are, the last 6 months. So now when Saturn goes retrograde, during the next 5 months, there will be some hesitation. You will think twice before spending. And because Jupiter is in the 2nd house as well, many of you will be able to increase your savings during this retrograde period. Since Saturn is ruling your 11th house and is retrograde in the 12th house, that means that there are unfinished 11th house things that you may have to attend to during this period. As the 11th house presides over an aspect of pleasure, for example our social life, some of you could be re-evaluating which friends and ideals are necessary to you. So here it is possible to let go of friends or outcast yourself from groups that you belong to. In terms of work, Saturn retrograde in the 12th can be a period where you lose motivation to pursue your career goals, regardless if you are in a foreign country or your home country. This could be because there are changes in your workplace or job, and this could also be a period where you are feeling really unsure which direction to go to progress in your work. Pisces people are generally very impressionable, which means that they can be easily influenced. And the 12th house rules hidden enemies. The 6th house rules competitors and enemies that we can see in front of us. Whereas the 12th house, everything is hidden. So when Saturn is retrograde in the 12th house, you have to be very careful who you trust. If you have formed any new social or professional connections, or if you have been referred to any person who can promise you anything, you have to be wary, particularly if it involves the exchange of money. In terms of health and well-being, Saturn retrograde in the 12th house can mean a slow period for healing. So this is a time to find alternative methods or medicine which can aid your recovery. So if you have recently been diagnosed with anything, you may find the current medication may not be working, so you may have to have follow-up appointments at the hospital. If you have recently or the last 6 months lost a loved one or somebody close to you and you have not been able to heal from that grief, then this retrograde period can be an overwhelming period where the grief is even more suppressed. So the best thing to do is work with the Aquarius energy and reach out to bereavement counselors or psychologists. Now the final thing is, when Saturn transits the 12th house, it brings the onset of Saraswati, which can bring hidden pain or unconscious fear. So externally, there might not be any obstacles in your life, but there can be something internally at the back of your mind which is making you upset. And Saturn doesn't like to be overwhelmed by these feelings, which can often create a gloomy mood and lead a person to detach from friends, family, and be isolated, and often lead to escapism, depending on your natal chart, where someone uses alcohol or substance abuse to temporarily find temporary peace, which stems from an inner lack of void. So during this Saturn retrograde period, you have to take care not to isolate yourself too much and try to seek help if you feel like this. So that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching and hope you found the information useful. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up so that it encourages me to make more content. If you have any questions, feel free to put it in the comment section below, or you can email me at exaltedmercury8@gmail.com. And I'll see you next time. Thank you.